Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Harvesting Nature's Wild Fish and Game Podcast. You got host here, the one, the only. Actually, I'm not the one and the only. If you search me, the searches are mixed between me and a guy named Justin Townsend who does lighting design for Broadway shows. We're definitely not the same person. I promise you that. I've seen Broadway shows. I've never designed the set on one, or done lighting. So the only lighting I've done is in this room, which involves turning on the light switch. That's about it. But I'm joined by Adam. You can hear
the one and only. I think
the one and only Adam Berkelmans. Let's see.
I don't think there's any others, as far as I know.
Let's see. Oh, the Intrepid Eater. Oh, you're on LinkedIn, YouTube. You have a profile on Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Sportsman's Empire. Dude, yeah, quite the entourage. Outdoor famous. News. Oh, Barnes and Noble.
Oh.
And look at you. There's you everywhere. I appreciate your picture on the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers page.
Which one is that?
Where did it go? It doesn't show your profile picture on there is you sipping it looks like a tiki drink out of a pink flamingo.
Oh yeah. I think that was in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, all right. I will say the one and only.
The one and only internet sensation.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. You're famous. Yeah, when you search your name, even if you look on images, there's probably 40, but that's it, which is good. Cool, man. Congrats. All right, so, now that I've clearly gone down a rabbit hole in the first 2 minutes of the show, let's see. So, today, on this very day, we're going to be discussing, continuing on through the tail end of our Cooking by Cut series, and we're going to discuss bones and making stock. Two very important things, I think. If you think about hunters and anglers, we are uniquely positioned to keep the bones of animals that are otherwise very quickly discarded through most commercial butchery practices. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. The law. So, with that, because we end up with the whole animal, much like a butcher or even a home butcher of domestic animals does, we can choose to take home bones. And we'll get into definitely why you should leave this episode with a good understanding and a comfortableness to be like, I understand why I should be keeping bones. And hopefully that leads you to a conscious decision to take bones if able. And I'm going to say if able with an asterisk. Because if you're in a position, say you're way out in the backcountry and you got to haul meat back and you have a lot of meat, to haul over multiple trips or all that, I totally get it. Cut the bones out. They're heavy. Leave them. Let them go back to nature. They'll get used by a critter of some sort. So that's okay. But if you take a whole animal from the field, or you can take bone-in quarters out, I highly encourage you to keep them for a variety of things. But most importantly is to keep them for stock, which we'll get into why that's important and what the difference is between just using water in food and using stocks, broths, consomme, all those things. We'll get into everything. And exciting enough, our next episode, big name here, Andrew Zimmern. We're going to be talking about hunting and cooking and traveling, and he's got a bunch of projects. I'm trying to remember the first time I ever saw Andrew Zimmern on a show. I think it was
Bizarre Foods, maybe?
Bizarre Foods, yeah. It used to air around about it would air before, I think, No Reservations.
Yeah.
Like back in the day on Travel Channel.
Yeah. They had a crossover at one point, too, where they're both on the same show, I think.
Yep. Yeah, so he is a hunter and an angler. And naturally, we all know he's a pretty darn good chef. So we will have him on the show, and we're going to talk a lot about food and stuff. So keep your ear out for the next episode where we'll have him on. I'm pretty excited about this show.
Yeah, me too.
It'll be some cool conversation, I have no doubt. Let's see. And then our next Cooking by Cut episode, we're going to be discussing the heart and the liver, and then we're going to have a guest on. I guess a guest. She's one of the crew. So our senior staff writer, Heidi Chaya, she'll be on with us. She is I would say a connoisseur of the liver and the heart. You'll see on our website, she's got a few recipes there that involve both those cuts of meat. So we are going to chat about that. Both Adam and I think Adam's a bigger liver fan than I am, but I'm a huge heart fan. I heart. So we'll do that. Let's see. And before we kick it off and get down to the soup and bones, we will I'll catch you up quickly. So I think last episode I talked a little bit about like urban foraging, so I'm not going to go down that. If you want to hear about that, go listen to the last episode with Brandon Dale. I talk about both pawpaws and the Kentucky coffee bean, which are some cool things to learn about. If you don't know them, Google them. If you want to learn more, go listen to that episode and then finish it out. But outside of that, we've been kind of trying to reduce stuff in my freezer, so very focused on cleaning out the freezer, getting ready for the opening of deer season in Maryland, which is a good close proximity for me to go hunting at. Both Virginia and Maryland are, but I think my residency carries over to Maryland. So we'll be doing some hunting in Maryland. Deer season opens up here very quickly. We also had a number of like kind of pretty fun, exciting articles that got published here within the last couple weeks over at Harvesting Nature. I talked about my breakup letter with dove poppers on the last episode, so I won't cover that, but that's a good one. And then we released like a pronghorn antelope kind of flavor profile overview with some like suggested recipes in that. We get a lot of questions, and if you think about it, a large population of folks that maybe have never hunted before, or maybe they're East Coast hunters, they haven't been out to the West to go, hunt those animals or things like that. Like, what does pronghorn taste like? And so we kind of cover what it tastes like, some good uses for it, what you can expect out of the meat, some common like myths about the meat, as well is also to like some how mishandling leads to odd flavors, that sort of bad word gamey that we talk about. A lot of people describe antelope as sagey, but we posted that, or I wrote and posted it, and then we shared it widely on social media and got a lot of feedback from it. A lot of people were engaged on it on social media, discussing, ranking how they thought it was in comparison to other game animals, and sort of sharing positive experiences with the meat and bad experiences with the meat, and a lot of good just open dialogue, which I was really excited about, because sometimes you post on social media and it's just a whole lot of just like, meat shaming, recipe, just a lot of negative feedback. But I think this was a very good post, and a lot of people were kind of talking to each other about it, and it was cool to see that positive interaction around an animal that I really love. I think pronghorn antelope is awesome. Let's see, and Adam today published a roast recipe. You want to talk quickly about that?
Sure, yeah. It's so I took a bone-in sirloin tip roast that I took out of a whitetail. And I made it in August, but we had this weird little cold snap in August where it got down to like pretty chilly at night, and for a couple days, and I just was feeling that kind of autumnal air kind of coming in, and you want something nice and comforting more than a salad. So I made a kind of a roast dinner with like I did a reverse sear on the sirloin tip roast. Meaning you just kind of slow cook in the oven until it's pink inside, and then do a final blast of heat to get it nice and crunchy. It was like a juniper and black peppercorn mix on the outside. I made like a nice onion gravy with the drippings, some Yorkshire puddings, and some just as vegetable side. And that was a really beautiful meal to eat during a kind of cold snap like that. So if you're looking for something to do with that big sirloin tip roast that you have in the back of the freezer before deer season, that's what you should do with it. It turned out great.
Ironically, just this past weekend, I smoked an Axis sirloin tip. It was a sirloin tip, and it was a bunch. It was just labeled back quarter. So I went into it with that. I think it was left over from one of our pig camps, but I had the Axis, and I started trimming and stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, here's like the tri-tip, here's this, here's some pieces of some other cuts that probably weren't meant to be cut apart, but they are all attached to the sirloin tip, and I kind of trimmed it all up really well, and I tied it up into a roast and seasoned it with our big game blend only and just some salt, and I put it in the smoker at 190 for about 4 hours until it hit like 130. And then I pulled it, and I've just been slicing and eating lunch meat, all like sandwiches all week. Oh, it's been so good. I put sugar on the outside as well. I wanted it a little sweet. But Hank Shaw has a great recipe where he talks about kind of that of smoking game meat cuts, the bigger cuts, and kind of a way to dry them out is to not look at like traditional Southern barbecue, but look at West Coast, like the Santa Maria style barbecue, which tends to cook things more to medium rare and not like up to 195 or 200 where they fall apart, so that then they're sliced. But you still get that great smoky flavor. So still had a nice smoke ring on it as well. I'd probably say like a half inch into it, but it wasn't. It was still pretty tender and cooked at like a good medium rare temp. I enjoyed it. Loved it.
Nice.
So probably won't post a recipe about it. Go look at Hank's if you want. If not, whatever. Just do it. Take a chunk of meat, throw it in the smoker until it hits 130, and then pull it off. Let it rest and slice it.
Yeah.
So, all right. What's up? What's been up with you, Adam? Where you been? What have you been doing?
Not too much. I've been mushroom harvesting like always. I've been finding all sorts of fun late summer, early fall mushrooms. So like lobsters, chanterelles, winter chanterelles, yellowfoot chanterelles, hedgehog mushrooms, indigo milk caps, saffron milk caps, just all sorts. So I've been hauling all sorts of mushrooms in and playing around with them in the kitchen. And then today I just stopped by to see a buddy, and he sent me home with a massive care package of wild game and stuff, which I'm so thankful for. So he had like moose cheeks and tongue. He had listened to our podcast on the head, so he was excited about it. He sent me home with some of that stuff, a bunch of fish that he caught out west or down south. Just all sorts. It's a huge care package. So Mo, if you're listening to this, thanks again. I'm so excited to try all this stuff, and also some of the best, like barring Adam Steele's stuff, probably some of the best cured wild game I've ever had in my life. So yeah, he's been doing a really good job of that. So very excited about that. Very thankful. So hopefully you can turn some of them into recipes for Harvesting Nature and share the wealth in a however way I can. Other than that, I'm just gearing up for hunting season. It's all coming up super soon. I'm going to be doing some butchering for an outfitter this year, which will be interesting. So we'll be doing like a whole bunch of deer, so that'll be kind of fun. Something I've always butchered all my friends and family and neighbors and everything deer, but I haven't done that in a long time, so that'd be kind of cool. Other than that, I'm just I'm going camping this weekend. I've been preparing for that and enjoying the weather slowly cooling down, getting into my favorite time of year.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly. I think it's been in the 50s during the day, or in overnight and into the morning, 50 into 60s, and then like mid 70s during the day, which is great. It's been great for here, because when we got here in July, it was 100 plus.
Stinking hot.
Yeah, so very hot.
Actually, I switched my truck. The the temperature gauge in it. There's like a little digital readout. I switched it to Fahrenheit, so now I know what you're talking about.
Oh, nice, nice.
So whenever I feel okay, it's all 70. I see what that is.
I feel like maybe I should do it the other way.
Yeah,
Switch mine to Celsius. I don't. My van doesn't have a temperature gauge. No. I just stick my finger out the window and like, it's hot or it's cold. All right. Well, let's start talking. Let's get down to the meat and bones. I'm gonna keep playing this one. All right, so let's start on the topic of bones here, and so the physical description of cut. The bones are obviously the skeleton of the animal, as you can imagine. But for the sake of this episode, we'll include cartilage, feet, tendon, sinew, and marrow. Kind of in the conversation, and we're gonna touch more on the trotters later in like their own specific culinary use, but we'll lump this in because you could definitely save the feet as part of this larger skeletal usage. So we'll mix that in for now, but all inclusive here. So anything that is not meat, is not organs, not skin or hair, we'll throw in the bone category.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. So, and the reason we'll do that is because they're largely connected to each other, those things I mentioned. But, so bones can be broken down into a few categories. You got your knuckle bones, which are found at the end of your longer bones. The bone itself is dense with marrow on the interior, and then the round exterior is covered in a layer of cartilage with the odd piece of tendon or ligaments mixed in there. So that's your kind of knuckle bones. Your long bones, or your marrow bones, they stem from long, strong bones such as the femur, which is in your upper hind leg, the tibia, which is in your lower hind leg, the humerus, which is your upper front leg, ulna, radius, all those, which are full of marrow and are really, like, on bigger animals, I'll tell you this. On bigger animals, like roasted bone marrow, spread on a piece of toast, just a little salt and pepper, is like heaven.
There's not too much that's better than that.
No. And for those people that have never tried it, I encourage you. You can go, if you've got bones in your freezer, if you got big, like, I think like elk or moose bones are probably going to be the best ones. Find some way to cross-cut them down the middle so you can see the tendon. And then all you do is you just roast them in your oven until they're nice brown. You'll see the marrow in the center kind of turn gelatinous. And when it is, pull it out. This is such an important part of cuisine across the world that there's a special tool for eating bone marrow, which I think is phenomenal.
Yeah, if you haven't had it, you're missing out. It's like, I call it meat butter. I don't know if that sounds good or not, but it's basically meat butter. It's spreadable, delicious, rich, meaty goodness.
I go, all right, so I'll say if you don't have wild game bones, go to the store, and usually in your grocery store, your butcher, you could tell them, I would like bones for roasting marrow to eat. And they will likely have it either packaged and wrapped, or they'll have it like in the back somewhere where they've cut. But do it. You will not regret it. Write us in, post on social media, send us a message on Instagram. Tell us your bone marrow experience, because I want to hear about it. If you love it as much as I do. If you don't, tell me too, because then I want to learn more. So, all right. Enough on my marrow rant. Rib bones are another type of bone. So those are cut from the rib cage, obviously, and often have scraps of meat attached, making them great for stock. Also, too, if you roll back to our episode about rib bones, or ribs in general, you can get some good recipes for eating the meat and the ribs. Not the rib bones, but the rib meat. You've got flat bones like the scapula, the shoulder blades, the pelvis, the hip bones. So those are kind of different. And then you have your spinal bones, which include your vertebrae, your neck, and tail. And those are all full of nerves and cartilage. And you've got your, what's that called? Spinal cord. Spinal cord runs through there. All that stuff. And then you've got what we'll call the other bones, which would be like your skull, jaw, feet, tail. We'll throw in that category as well. Actually, no, tail would be part of the spinal bones. I read that. So why we mentioned earlier the cartilage and tendons and sinew would be lumped into here because they're often found all around the animal. You know it a lot through different, as you start to break out the meat cuts, we spend a lot of time talking about sinew and silver skin and all that stuff. But a lot of time the purpose of those is to bind muscle to the bone or to act in some like functionary fashion to allow the bone to move and interact and do its job. So there are two large tendons that also run down the backstrap and short, thick tendons that can be found on the shanks. And then one of my favorite cuts, the flat iron up in the front shoulder. If you don't take that big, thick tendon out of the middle, you end up with like a very chewy cut of meat that's otherwise very tender. And I'll talk a little bit how to remove them. So each meat cut, as you break down the animal, as we've talked about removing it from the bone, sort of each step of the way. So it should be really clear on how to remove the cut from the bone. Just go back and listen to those episodes. But in the most simplistic sense, the easiest way to do it is you just cut the meat off the bone. That's it. You just locate the bone, cut as close to it as possible, get the meat off. You can take one big giant piece off, commonly called deboning. And I've seen some weird videos floating around social media of there's a guy, it's got to be in Eastern Europe or some other country in Europe where he completely goes through deboning animals. Like all the way through. Which I was thinking in my mind, I was like, that's kind of cool. Like your skill, precision, first off, it takes a lot of time. But like debones it as the entire meat is still attached together, bound by the tendons and sinew. But then I was thinking about it, and I was like, depending on what you're going to do with that, you've got a lot of different muscles in there that are going to react differently when cooked.
Yeah. I do it a lot with like chickens and turkeys and ducks and
Sure.
and rabbits. But once you start getting bigger than that, you're playing with all the different textures and cooking rates and stuff. It's not going to be the best, I don't think.
Yeah, it just seems like, I mean, really, I think one of your only things is you would have to cook it like low and slow in order to break down all the tendons and the silver skin and all that. Otherwise, you're completely deboning an animal just to break it down into individual cuts, which you could have done and still had the bones. But I don't know, whatever. I think it's cool skills. I'm sure it'll become an Olympic sport one day. I could only hope. But I would say, it's an interesting thing. So after you get the meat off of the bone, you can then trim it and take your tendons and your sinew and your silver skin and take those and set them aside. Don't throw them away. Set them aside, and you can use them for stock making, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a little bit. But I'll turn it over to Adam now for some culinary history.
Yeah, so there's a long history with bones, very long history, as the first humanoids and human beings were already eating bones, and they were after that marrow.
Not much has changed.
Not much has changed, so I just feel like a caveman every time I'm cracking bones to get in that marrow. So they would often roast the bones in the fire and then crack them open with a rock and kind of scoop the marrow out. And scientists found samples of long bones that were over like 400,000 years old in a cave in Tel Aviv, I think. And they saw evidence that early humans would wrap these bones with like skins and kind of cap them, and they'd let them hang for up to 9 weeks. And it acted like a primitive form of canning to preserve the marrow. So whereas they'd have to like food preservation was much tougher back then, obviously. So they came up with some pretty ingenious ways so they could hold on to this like super nutritious, because the marrow is probably the most nutritious part of the whole animal. Super calorically heavy. It's got all sorts of minerals and vitamins and everything in it. So to be able to hold on to that for like 2 months is pretty special. So that's kind of cool. North America, indigenous people would use the marrow, often adding it to pemmican. If they didn't just eat it straight up. And pemmican is, once again, it's like a jerky-like food that lasted for long periods of time and offered a highly caloric and nutritious meal, all the more so if there's marrow mixed into it. Moving along up to the 1800s, back to what you were saying earlier, they created a special spoon called a marrow scoop. So diners and
about to Google it.
Oh yeah, way back in the 1800s, they had this long, narrow spoon with kind of a dished spoon, whatever, on the front of it, and they would poke it down. So they would have the marrow bones cut and kind of the long bones whole, and poke it down into the marrow bone to scoop it out. So we've been enjoying marrow for a long time. Some kind of more modern uses for the bones and marrow that you might encounter today. One of the big ones is Vietnamese pho. It is used with marrow bones. It's that soup. If you just use a basic broth without any of the marrow bones, it's not the same. To get that beautiful rich pho, you need the awesome marrow bones in it. Another one is Filipino bulalo, and that's just another kind of marrow bone soup, which is so delicious. Pho you can also get often with the tendons in it, which one of my favorite things. They're when you slow cook a tendon, they have this super interesting, bouncy but giving texture. It's very interesting. But if you love pho and you haven't tried the special where they put everything in it, like the tripe and the tendons and everything, that's where you find that. It's incredible.
I'm also an extra meatball kind of guy when it comes to pho.
Yeah,
I like. There's something about the density of meatballs that just
springy,
yeah,
meatballs. So good. To get those, they whip their meat. So you get the ground meat, and instead of an Italian meatball, you wouldn't want to handle it too much. But for the springy Vietnamese and Chinese ones, you really whip the meat into almost a paste and then put it in. That creates that kind of springy texture.
You could do it in a food processor as well.
Yeah,
I
that
think
works
too.
too.
A very easy way. We just did it with we did shrimp patties. I think the other day. We put the shrimp in the food processor and process it till they were good. But yeah, I noticed the same springiness that you get from there.
Definitely. It's kind of interesting in some Chinese restaurants in over in China, not the ones here probably, but long bones from pigs. So the pigs, probably femurs, are cooked slowly in soups, and then they're served to diners with a straw. And you stick the straw into the marrow bone, and it's been cooking the soup for long that the marrow's kind of liquefied in it. And then you just suck out the liquidy marrow with the straw, which sounds like something right up my alley. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
I want to do that.
Yeah. I might just try to find a recipe for that and translate it into English. And, over in Europe, you encounter Italian ossobuco, which is the shanks, the cross-cut, but all that marrow inside the shank really helps add that, the richness to that dish. Same thing with French pot au feu. Always use braised marrow bones. And then a cool one is a Persian stew called dizzy. I might be mispronouncing that, but it's a really rich stew, and it's made with chunks of lamb, and then they actually just mix a bunch of marrow into the stew itself, so it just would be super rich. And through time immemorial, bones were used for more than just food. They were collected from animals and not just cracked and boiled, but they'd be used for buttons and combs and clasps. You could use them for weapons and hunting weapons. You could use them in farming tools, hunting tools, fishing, gathering tools. People built houses out of them, especially when you get into more of the Arctic kind of places where there'd be houses made from whale and mammoth bones. People would grind the bones into bone meal, use them for fertilizer. People would use them for fortune telling. So, the
interesting. Oh, yeah.
Roll the bones, or it's like the knuckle bones. It would be fortune teller, almost like dice, like rolling the bones to see what your fortune would be. They were turned into instruments, dog chews, and then the tendons were often dried and pounded into individual threads and used to make bows. So tendons and sinews, bowstrings, and also the sinews to almost as like an adhesive string to wrap things together on bows. Mm-hmm. So without bones and sinews and everything, we couldn't have ever industrially kind of involved as a species. I don't think like that. They really helped us get by with the nutrition of the marrow and the bones themselves as tools.
Yeah, very, very versatile.
Yeah.
I'd say. But I think the fascination of tools, because it's something too, like we're not the only ones throughout human evolution to be like, hey, what do we do with this? Like, what do we do with these things? I've got the meat over there, but like, what about this other stuff? And I think as we've moved through modern times, less and less dependence on using bones for tools, but still like fairly common in a lot of things that you wouldn't, well, maybe you would imagine it. I know it was a big thing, like, what was that, mad cow disease came about because cattle were getting fed bone meal from cattle.
Cows.
Yeah. Not a good idea.
No.
So I think that's one thing. I'm trying to think what else we can think of that bones are like readily used for outside. I can't think of anything. I think
not too much anymore. I guess they probably don't. There's not much market for corsets anymore. I think they were all made of bone.
I mean,
like
people still wear. Ladies still wear corsets.
Corsets.
But I think what has happened is synthetic or manufactured products like plastic have replaced bone. Which I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing that happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure the rendering plants, there's plants that, there's the butcher, the meat packing plants, and then there's the rendering plants. So all the stuff that doesn't get used in the meat packing plants that goes to us gets brought to the rendering plants. And that stuff gets made into things or like individual items or made into dog food or whatever. But I'm sure they use the bones, all the bones. I'm sure there's no waste coming out of those things. So it'd be interesting to see what they use them all for.
And let's see. So we'll get to our final point here, which sort of the bones is why keep the bones? One, obviously, we mentioned obsession with sweet marrow, bone marrow being number one. So you can't have bone marrow without bones. It's a starting point. There's no chicken or egg debate here. You need bones before you can get to bone marrow. For making stocks and broths, which we're going to talk the next few minutes about. And then also, I think for your dogs, right? Everybody's got dogs now. I have a dog. I don't know if everybody knows I have a dog now. His name's Cooper. He's a beagle. He loves bones. But I would say caveat this. Research what types of bones you can give dogs and like raw, cooked, and then whether or not chewing bones is actually good for that type of dog. It's kind of caveat, but it's a good option, right? There's that like iconic thought of like cooking and then tossing the dog a bone. But also I would say too, outside we said stocks and broths, but also too cooking. Leaving bones in meat and then cooking with it, either roast form, soup form, like bone in cuts of meat are great. You're going to get added flavor that's coming out via the bone and the marrow and the sinew and the tendons and stuff as you leave it on. Just understand you have to, treat it a little differently. The cooking evenness and stuff varies when you have boneless meat versus bone-in meat.
I'd always much prefer to cook on the bone if possible, generally. For the home butcher, if you're interested in leaving the bone on things, you're probably either going to have to joint things out into huge pieces or buy yourself a bone saw, which is very handy. It's just like basically a special hacksaw. You could splurge and buy yourself a bandsaw, which would be sweet to have, but not many people would have that available space or money for it. Then you can just zip them through the bandsaw, which is what most butchers do, like the butchers with the actual butcher shop. Or you could practice the batoning technique, which is a nice heavy cleaver and a rubber mallet, and you just kind of like put the tip of the cleaver onto bones, and you're not going to chop through like a femur bone with this. We're talking more about spines and ribs and stuff like that. Put the tip of the cleaver on and give it a whack with the rubber mallet. Make sure you have a nice thick wooden cutting board underneath, so you don't destroy everything like we both have done in the past.
Plastic tables. Plastic tables will
yeah.
not stand up to batoning.
No, apparently.
Sorry, everyone whose table I've punched a hole in the last 2 years.
Yeah, so if you want to leave bone in, which is a great option, and the leaving bone in is good because it helps with the moisture content in the meat. I find it helps. I don't know if it's totally true or not. It seems to help with flavor. It creates kind of a base for cooking, so it's not just like it doesn't like buckle as much. And lastly, I love just chewing on a bone.
Yeah,
I'm like a dog. I just want to chew on the bone. So that's one of my favorite parts about eating meat. So that's something that I like to have just available.
I think like growing up as a kid, like bone-in pork chops on the grill, or even like T-bones was like phenomenal, because you just got to cut around a little bit, and then you got to just pick it up and like gnaw off the rest of the meat. It's like eating corn dog off a stick. There's something satisfying about it. Oh, on the nature of saws. So also too, you can use like a hacksaw as well. You just need to choose the appropriate blade for it. I would say don't go with like a big wide tooth like you would be used for cutting wood. I think using one for like metal would be better. It's just because the hacksaw has got kind of that curved back and then the thin blade, you're kind of restricted on where you can get into on the animal. But you could certainly hacksaw a lot of different cuts of meat with a hand. And I think like I even ordered a like a meat saw, and it's essentially like a little hacksaw.
Yeah.
But yeah, essentially like you can use it. You can just go to the hardware store and buy a hacksaw, and you could cut meat with it.
Yeah. You could try a Sawzall too, like a reciprocating saw, but you're gonna have to get about 3 or 4 people to hold down the piece of meat.
Yeah.
I just see it just jiggles right out of the.
Yeah, I think Adam Steele uses a hack like a Sawzall to cut, to like split the animal down the middle, which is not as hard to do if you've got it hanging and you're just kind of like dragging it down the spine to split it in half. Yeah. You can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, it's easy. We do our pigs like that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say reserve a special blade for meat cutting and reserve a blade for wood and or metal cutting. Don't mix them up.
Yeah.
Also, too, I'm not a big fan of bone dust that comes. Like I'm a big fan of the batoning for the fact that you don't get as much bone dust you get when you saw, but you can certainly scrape the bone dust off, and like there's ways to mitigate it. I think there's some cuts you just naturally end up with, like you cut the shanks for ossobuco and stuff like that. Like you end up with like bone dust because you can't baton a shank.
No, good luck.
Yeah, if anybody batons a shank and you're successful, send me a message on Instagram. Please let us know. Let us know we're wrong. But
I know the butcher shop I used to work at, we had these little bone dust scrapers. It's like a little plastic like hoop kind of thing on the handle, and because we had a bandsaw, so you get a lot of bone dust. So we just all scrape off every piece of meat, run through the bandsaw every time.
Yeah.
So those are probably like $5 online if you want to find one of those.
I'm sure too. I think about like the little tool that you use to decrumb the table at restaurants.
I never worked in a restaurant.
No. All right, so it's like a little. It's like not a half moon. It's almost a half moon, but it's kind of like a thing. It's about like that. You keep it in your apron. Okay. But you use it to scrape the crumbs off, like in between settings. So if somebody's like going from appetizers to mains, you'll take their plate, and then you'll take the little crumb scraper, for lack of a better word, and you'll put them off into like a napkin or onto the empty plate, or and then take it away, and now it's like clean. But yeah, it's very much a thing. But I think about that when I think about a bone scraper, because you could probably use that same tool to do it with. But I'm sure there's a variety of things. You could probably use a spackling tool.
Yeah, you could
like whatever, credit card. So, all right, let's see. Let's switch gears here a little bit, and let's dive into the realm of stock, because I would say probably most common use of bones is going to be for stock. And I'd say probably one of the largest benefits, if you think about using the whole animal and really cooking all the way through the animal, like this is the final step to sort of like maximize the last bits of the animal that are otherwise not as easily used. Although making stock's pretty easy. So I'm going to turn it over to Adam, explain the difference between stock, broth, bone broth, and other variations.
Yeah, so I'd say that's probably the elephant in the stock room here, because I've been asked this question a lot. I've seen people ask it online a lot. What the hell is the difference between broth, stock, and bone broth? We've been hearing a lot about bone broth for the last decade. We tossed broth and stock around a lot. And to be honest, I kind of use them interchangeably, which isn't quite correct, but I just kind of say whatever comes to my mouth. So if I do this during this podcast, I apologize if it's confusing, but I've always kind of done that. But when you get into the nitty gritty of it, the difference between them is that a broth is made from simmering a variety of meats, not always bone. It's often just a little meat, vegetables and spices in water for a short time, like 30 minutes to 2 hours. So that'd be like a, light soup or something. I'd often do that with like fish. I don't make a lot of just light broths like that, not too often. But I might make something like that if it's just, to make rice taste better, to make like a quick broth to use in cooking. A stock, on the other hand, is made similar to broth, but includes bones. So you're simmering more bones than the meat itself. You can add vegetables and spices and meat into it if you want, and it's generally cooked for 2 to 4 hours. So you're looking at more flavor, like a kind of denser, I guess, broth, more gelatin in it. We talked about this so much, but the gelatin will form from all the cartilage and everything, and the bones and the marrow and everything. And
that's a good point. Remember we mentioned earlier, take all the sinew, the cuts, the silver skin, and set it aside. It's for the stock. Sorry.
Yeah, because that stuff all has that what's going to become gelatin in your broth, and that gelatin is going to give you that like dense kind of rich, lip smacking, kind of sticky,
unctuous mouthfeel.
Yeah, it's not just a light kind of watery thing. It's like something of its own. And if you just do only, say, rib bones or only long bones, you're probably not going to get a ton of gelatin. But if you start mixing in, feet and heads and sinews and tendons and all that kind of stuff, the silver skin, like that's going to really add up to a lot of gelatin. And you can tell when you have a lot, when you take the stock and you put it in the fridge and it sets hard, it's like a big jello thing, basically. That's when you know that you pulled out all that gelatin, which makes for great stock. So that's stock. Then we get into bone broth, which has become very popular as kind of a health fad lately. You can buy it for ridiculous amounts of money from the grocery store, which I don't recommend. It's easier to buy bones or get bones from hunting and doing it yourself rather than paying $15 for a little jar of broth. But that is made by simmering bones in addition to maybe some meats, vegetables, and spices, whatever, for a very long time. So now we're talking about 12 to 48 hours. So basically anything that's in those bones is leaching out into the soup, and it's apparently a lot more nutritious. It's going to be, once again, kind of denser, a lot more gelatin and everything in it. So that's like, if you have the time and wherewithal, you can make that like, super rich bone broth. Do you want to, since I don't know how much you did when you were cooking professionally, but like consommes and those other types of broths, did you get into making those much?
Not as much. We primarily stuck to making like stocks. But it's funny because I remember like one of my first like mess up mistakes in the restaurant. I went out to the walk-in. They're like, "Hey, we need more duck stock," and so I like go out to the walk-in, and there's these big tubs of chicken stock, pork stock, beef stock, duck stock, and I was getting something, or I think I was getting that, and I accidentally knocked a thing of pecans over, and they like partially fell into the stock, and I was just like kind of scooped them out with my hand and went on, and then come to find out, I like told someone, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, like we got to get rid of it," and I was like, "What do you mean we got to get rid of it?" They're like, "If somebody has an allergy, a nut allergy, and we serve them this, now it's infected. Like anyway, good learning moment of like, holy smokes. But so I haven't dove too much into it. I'm not a big like. I like the flavor. I think David Chang and his whole concept of like the ugly delicious, or like you've seen my food too. Things get like just poured on the plate. Like, I've never earned a Michelin star. I've never had a high-end rating or anything. Like the flavor of food matters a lot. The presentability and the appearance matters great. But I think when you talk about consommé versus like a stock, really you're looking at like clarified and it's concentrated. And a lot of times they're not combined with a soup. It's just served on its own. So it's a very important thing. The like most common way to do it is to use egg whites. Because what it is if you think about making stock, right? The easiest way to imagine this whole process is, all right, you've got your meat, your bones, your vegetables, your whatever. And you cook those for whatever amount of time. And then you take those and you strain them off. Well, maybe you strain them off with just like a big rough filter. Maybe you pick them out with a pair of tongs, right? There's all these little floaty bits in there. So then you're going to pass that through like a smaller filter. And you're just going to keep progressing down. And you get all the way down to where you're down into the level of like a coffee filter or a cheesecloth, where you're filtering everything off. And then from there, if you really want to get particular about it, you're using egg whites to absorb the last bit of those particles.
I've seen ground pork used too, which seems like such a waste of pork
or
such a waste of meat. But yeah, it kind of like collects all the little bits and they all stick to this like floating mat.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never bothered doing it. I'm a very similar cook to you in terms of a little more rustic.
Yeah.
I can't be bothered to make like a traditional French consommé or anything.
So I'll just so I don't mess this up, I'll go here. So on the Masterclass website, I'll give them credit for it. I'll read it here. So I'll quote them. To make consommé, start with a flavorful stock or broth, just as I mentioned. If your stock isn't very flavorful, try reducing it before making consommé. Remove the fat by skimming and or cooling your stock. When chilled, the fat will solidify and can easily be removed. Save the fat for another use. In a large stock pot, slowly bring the cold stock to a boil while whisking in egg whites. One, it says whisk egg whites until frothy. Two, if adding ground beef, mirepoix, aromatics like whole black peppercorn, parsley, thyme sprigs, add them into a large stock along with the egg whites and mix all together. I think that's what you're talking about. I'm not 100%. I don't think I've ever. I think these must be 3. Add cold stock pot to simmer consommé for about an hour, in which the impurities, bits from the meat, bones, vegetables can percolate up through the stock and into the egg white filter, sometimes called a raft. Use a ladle to make a hole in the center of the raft. This acts as a vent, allowing the consommé to simmer without damaging the rest of the filter. Continue to simmer for 30 to 60 minutes. Use the ladle, strain the liquid through a cheesecloth or fine mesh sleeve to serve. So that's kind of it. Basically, like the egg whites settle on top and everything kind of floats and binds to it. Essentially is how you end up with it. But essentially, to get like a consommé, you want to be able to hold it up into like a window or light and be able to see clearly through it. Is essentially how it is.
It's very impressive and tasty, but it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and I tend to favor the flavors of just a plain stock. I do strain it though. I'll strain it through I'll pick everything out. I'll strain it through like a colander. I have like a mesh colander. I'll strain it through there. Then I put it through a tea filter.
Okay.
And that's about as far as it go.
Yeah.
Because I think it's cool to have some of the spices like in there. I skim the fat as it cooks, kind of off the top. Just because some of that I don't want in there.
Yeah. So,
and then I typically mason jar or ball or whatever the brand is, and then freeze it. I just made just this past weekend had wild pork bones. And I roasted them in the oven with carrots and celery and garlic and onion, and then threw them in the stock pot with parsley, sage, rosemary, black peppercorns, the bones, and I think I got probably 5 or 6 liters.
Oh yeah.
So, which went into the freezer, and I'll thaw those out.
Yeah. And if you're doing that, make sure you don't overfill your mason jars.
Yep.
Because they will expand as they freeze and crack them, and then it's all useless.
Yeah.
So make sure you give lots of headspace if you're doing that.
I usually, there's a set of lines on the mason jar. Some of them say like freeze on them, and they have a line, but usually like the measurement of the cups as it goes up, or the ounces, I stop at the top when it leaves you about 1.5 inches of headspace, and I found out that that's usually generally enough.
Yeah.
How do you like to make stock? I covered how I like to make stock. How do you like to do it?
So I make a lot of stock at home, and I don't have a ton of space for it all. One thing that would be good for that is to get a pressure canner, because you can just pressure can all your stock and put it aside, like non-frozen or refrigerated. But I don't have that, so I don't do that. So what I do often, especially during hunting season, I'll take a whole deer, I'll butcher a deer, and usually I do this like with 5 deer or so, because no one wants the bones usually. I'll just take all the bones, I'll saw some down to size and whatever I'm not saving, I put them on a roasting pan and roast them at 400 or so until they're all nice and brown and roasty. That develops a lot of the Maillard reaction and gives everything a lot more flavor and darkness and richness, which I really enjoy in my stocks. I have my huge stock pot. I fill it with all the bones, fill it with water, like cold water, set it over the stove, and just let it simmer away for a long time. And I just let it keep simmering and simmering and simmering until there's only like a few inches, like maybe 6 inches left in the bottom of the pot. I then pour all that through a sieve. I'll check it out at that point. If it's still bad, maybe I'll put like a piece of paper towel or something in the sieve and pass it through again, just to get some of the more sediment out. Throw all the bones into a bag and get rid of them. And then that stock is so... And I throw all my sinews and my silver skin and anything else in there too. So there's lots of gelatin going on. Before I forget also, just a little aside, if you're making a stock out of bones that don't have a lot of gelatin, you just got some long bones, they're not going to form much, you can actually just get a pack of gelatin and put it in the pot. That's the technique that they use at Serious Eats, and it's a way to get a lot more body to your stock if you're not getting the natural gelatins forming from collagen. So anyways, so I got my stock now. It's been filtered. I pour it into a deep dish, like a baking dish, and I put it in the fridge overnight, and that sets into like hard blocks of gelatin. I then cut those into cubes, like, I don't know, just like 1 inch by 2 inches or something like that, and then set those on a baking tray kind of separately and put them in the freezer and let them freeze. And then I put those frozen cubes into a Ziploc bag. So you can just toss all the cubes in there, and then they're basically like homemade bouillon cubes. So then I just will take, and there's like super concentrated stock. So all I need to do is take one of these cubes, throw it in a pot, add water, and then I have venison stock. I find it takes way less space, and it's really handy. You can just just take a block out of the bag, toss it in, and then I will do the same for geese. I'll do the same for duck. I'll do the same for, not quite for fish. Usually I do the day of. Whatever else I'm cooking, chickens, anything else, I do the exact same thing, and just and then I have like a freezer full of awesome homemade bouillon cubes, which I love. So that's usually the technique that I use. It works out great for me, and that way I can get through do that 2 or 3 times, and I have like 5 deer go through that whole process. So I end up with a lot of awesome broth, and using that broth in all my dishes makes my dishes taste way better. So instead of using like a bouillon cube full of MSG, or like the carton from the store. Like to get a good quality one, you're paying like quite a bit of money for a little carton of it. Like my stuff tastes so much better because of that broth is kind of the backbone of it.
Well, I tend to as well. Like if I'm making rice for a dish, I will use the stock of the animal I'm preparing in the dish because it like ties the flavors together.
Yeah. Even say like today I just got some chicken breasts for something I'm doing with, and I bought them. I always buy bone in everything, no matter what. I took the bones out. Then I just then I got 4 chicken breasts with just like the little bits of bones and the meat. Throw that in a pot and simmer it for a while, and then I'll use that stock to make rice or noodles or whatever else I'm making to go along with the chicken. So even on like a super small scale, from going from 5 deers to like 3 or 4 chicken breasts, you can do the same kind of deal. And that's just like building flavors in your food. It all makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think like it's a commodity that's there, especially if you pay for bone-in anything. So like you're already paying for it, you may as well use it. And I think like I mentioned at the very front of the entire show, like as hunters and anglers, we are uniquely set up to keep bones, which I think is great. Also, too, I was going to say on seafood. So with seafood stocks, you don't have to cook them as long. Yeah, that's the other thing. Like it's very quick, like 10, 15 minutes. You're done. You've got everything out of it. You're gonna get out of it. When I buy shrimp at the store, I always buy shell on, and generally whatever I'm cooking with that shrimp, I take the shells after I peel it, and I throw in water, a little bit of seasoning, and I use that shrimp stock to make whatever I'm cooking. If it's like like a risotto or a paella or whatever I like. Yeah. Or soup, some sort of soup or rice or whatever. But you're like I said, you've already paid for it. You're paying by the pound, so you've already bought it. So you may as well use it. And it's in fish. I think it's so very easy to make. Even if you cook a whole fish, you can then take those bones and throw them into a pot with some garlic and some other things, and like boom, you've got a nice light broth or stock. So
and that's a good point too. If you're leaving stuff bone in your meat and you cook it up, just have a bag in the freezer and throw your not-on bones, whatever, in the freezer. In the bag, once you have enough in the bag, make a stock with it.
We do that too. A trick I learned early on in my restaurant career was vegetable scraps. Saving all your vegetable scraps, onion skin, celery cuts, like all that stuff that's not like visibly bad. You just literally, and we do it here pretty frequently, just like stuff all that in a Ziploc bag or a container and keep it in the freezer. And then whenever the container's full, you just pull it out, dump it all in a stock pot, pour water on it, cook it for 20, 30 minutes, and boom, you've got vegetable stock.
You got yourself a stew.
Yeah, just eat it. Ugh, all these cuts. But no, same concept. Like it's so very versatile, and it's good to have on hand, and it enhances any dish you put it in.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to say too. When I'm making my stocks, I don't add anything to them. Except I'll maybe add some onion or garlic or something. But when I'm making those big batch of stocks into cubes, like I mentioned, if I'm making like a little chicken stock with a chicken carcass, I'll add all sorts of fun stuff in there. But when I'm doing my venison ones, I just leave it totally plain because I use them for such different applications. I don't want to be putting, European flavored herbs when I want to use them for an Asian thing or vice versa or whatever. So I leave it pretty plain, and then you can always add those flavors and let it simmer for another 20 minutes afterwards, right? Yeah. So you can add, onion, celery, thyme, or you could do lemongrass, garlic, and ginger. Put those in for 15, 20 minutes, and then you've got the same thing in the end. So it just leaves me open to do whatever I want with it if I don't add flavors right at the beginning.
So we had it in our show notes here that we were going to go through a bunch of recipes, but I feel like we've covered.
Yeah, I don't think we really need to do it this time.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered it largely enough. If you need to dive in-depth recipes, we'll throw all the links in the show notes. You can go look at those. We'll say like there's a wild game stock recipe, there's venison ramen, there's turkey tail and venison bone broth, there's a European green crab stock, a Filipino venison shank car,
Cara, something like
Cara,
that. Cara.
and the venison stock by Hank Shaw.
Yeah.
Those will be in the show notes. You can go click them and peruse them if you like. Otherwise, I think Adam and I have thoroughly explained how to make stock. So if you have any questions, hit us up on Instagram. Tag us in the post, message us, either the Intrepid Eater, Adventures for Food, Harvesting Nature. One of us will see it. We'll get back to you. But other than that, I think we've kind of like wrapped up on time here. Adam, any last thoughts, alibis, misfires, anything you got?
I'll use this time to say two things I forgot to mention during this podcast really quickly. One is a clear broth or a dark broth. It is your choice whether you want to roast the bones beforehand or just leave them raw. Either works. You'll end up with a different outcome using either way. I prefer the roasted bones because it's a lot more flavor, a lot of that myide reaction stuff. But if you want kind of more of a simple, clean broth, don't bother roasting first. Just throw the bones right into the water and do it like that. And the other thing is bringing it all the way back to bone marrow, which we started this thing with, is make bone marrow butter. So compound butter is something you just add herbs or jam or whatever into a butter and mix it up. Cook some bone marrow, scrape it out of the bones, mix it with butter, let it set again in the fridge, and put that on whatever you want. And oh my god, it is so freaking good.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's just something super special. So, and it's so easy to make. It'll blow people's minds. Bone marrow butter is where it's at. I'm sure there's lots of recipes online. Maybe I'll make a recipe for Harvest Nature for it.
Yeah,
because it's so good.
Let's do it. Let's see. For me, so save the bones. That's it. That's my alibi. Don't toss them. If you can take them home, take them home. If you can't, I get it. But try to save them. Use them. Making stock so very simple. Your friends and family will thank you if you start incorporating it in more dishes, which I think is something everybody should do. Outside of that, if you want to get a good demonstration of how to use stock bones in person, come to our Wild Pig Culinary hunting camp, where Adam uses everything from the head all the way through all the bones and all the dishes. You will get a thorough explanation of how to use it. We talk about it in great detail, and you will get to experience and taste it firsthand. You can even take a jar home of it if you want. It's good. Also, while learning to shoot, hunt, butcher, process, and cook your own pigs. So, yeah, it's a great thing. Do that. And then whatever podcast platform you're listening to, please punch that 5-star button. Leave us a review. Tell us we're doing right, or, tell us we're doing wrong. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.